Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Annotated Bibliography webinar. I'm so happy you all could join us. Let's take a look at this part of the Right for a Cause topic exploration, all right? At this point in the semester, you have already determined exactly what your Right for a Cause topic is going to be. You figured out how to put it in a phrase and use advocating words to communicate it. You've also come up with a preliminary bibliography of at least 10 sources where you're able to not explain, but at least gather information that you may want to use in your Right for a Cause essays for the rest of the semester. So the annotated bibliography is essentially an overview of those 10 sources. So the point of the annotated bibliography, which is what we find out in the overview section, is for you to be able to communicate a summary of your sources, right? So you need to be able to summarize this information so that you know who said it, what they said, maybe even why they said it. You're able to evaluate it to see if it's something that will work for you as a scholarly source for your research papers. And then also you're able to determine how exactly it's going to connect into your research for your future papers. So you are summarizing, you're analyzing, you're evaluating, you're connecting. So there are like 4 things happening here. So if you're finding this part of the project to feel a little overwhelming, don't worry. We're going to simplify it for you hopefully today, and you'll be able to walk out of here knowing exactly what you're supposed to do. That's the goal. All right, so let's go through this really quickly. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to write 10 summaries to go with your 10 entries. Okay, so the goal of this unit is literally to teach you how to write those summaries, right? You've already determined how to write those bibliographic entries. Okay, so to do this, we are going to work on summary writing skills. And so if you haven't already, you want to make sure that you have completed some of the labs that deal with reading, like pre-reading, active reading, post-reading, because those reading strategies come together in this assignment to help you write the summary. So you kind of have to pair the reading and the writing specifically for this, all right? Keep in mind that you want to make sure that you're meeting the guidelines for this assignment. So the assignment requires that you have 10 sources and that you're writing 300 words per source, okay? We have a couple of outside sources here or outside connections here to help us do this more effectively. And to do this, we have solicited the likes of Cornell University, which is an Ivy League university in Ithaca, New York. And so the English department actually brought this page into our annotated bibliography unit so that you can have, again, another resource just to talk about how annotated bibliographies are written and mainly what they do. Annotated bibliographies are descriptive in nature. They are evaluative. It's a way for you to collect and gather information and then communicate that information to not only yourself, but also to others. So it requires a certain sort of structure and form, but the goal is for it to create a concise or brief overview of a source, all right? So whether you take American Lit with me, or whether you take history with someone else, you're going to want to know how to write an annotated bibliography, mainly because it's just a part of what we do at the college level, all right? So the process is essentially reading, literally annotating what you read, and then being thoughtful about what you're reading in terms of how it connects to what you're wanting to say with your topic. All right, so you have to think about how you want to use that source. And so in some sources, you're going to find ones that are going to agree with your topic. And in other sources, you're going to find that they disagree with your topic. But whatever the case, you want to make sure that you're exploring the sources themselves to make sure that they provide you with what you need. Now, to do that, you can do things like explore articles, you can look at summary abstracts and things of that nature, but keep in mind, an abstract and an annotation for a bibliographic entry, these are not the same things. Abstracts are what the author of the article writes in order to give a concise overview of their work. But the intention is for the audience who's reading the abstract to go deeper into their work. Therefore, you may get clues and ideas from an abstract in terms of what you want to put in your annotated bibliography, but you don't want to rely on that. You need to actually go into the source and do a deep dive of your own, because you want to look at the content there to see what you want to use in your work. The intent of the article may not match the intent of your right for a cost topic. So because of that, it's very important that you go in there and you read it yourself. You want to only pull out the things that you absolutely need for your paper and communicate those things in your annotated bibliography. Again, the goal of this annotated bibliography is to remind you of what you read, and it's also to give you an opportunity to go back to that summary and potentially figure out where the source material that you're hoping to get from that summary, where it is, and give you a quick and easy way to access that information. All right. Are there any questions so far about anything that I have explained about annotated bibliographies, annotations versus abstracts, etc.? Any questions so far? Yes, I would love to answer your question. Feel free, go for it.
So I understand it's a detailed summary, and it's you mostly want to communicate what you would actually use in your essay in the end. What if you come across one of your sources that is not so helpful? Would you go out and try to find another one and replace it first?
You can. I mean, if you find a source that's not all that helpful, you have to ask yourself, why is it not helpful? For instance, if it talks about ideas that are opposite of the ones that you really want to put forth, that source may seem like it's not helpful, but it may actually be very helpful, mainly because it gives you opposing points of view, right? So you want to make sure that you're still giving it credence. If you chose a source initially just based upon the title, but didn't necessarily scan it or anything, then that's something you may want to toss and get another source. But if it's just because it's not kind of telling you what you want to hear, figure out why to see if you can use any of that information to support potentially something that you do want to, say and support. Sometimes that counter argument can support or more strongly support an argument that you're making for your subject. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's just I was saying earlier how the information on my topic is a little scarce. I was just kind of worried that once I go in depth in some of my sources, it's just not entirely related at all. So I'd
Sure.
have to just look into that at that point.
Yeah, I mean, you can always add and drop as you go through the semester. You're not married to any of these sources, so feel free to let them go if they're not serving what you need for your essays.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, all right. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, one of my concerns is that I'm not sure for my topic I would be able to find a naysayer. Do you think that would lessen my paper at all or make it seem like I'm, only talking about my side or only talking about like my sources and not having a counter argument?
Sure. I like your question. It's actually a really good question. And now's a good time to ask it, by the way. I think that if you have an argument that's not arguable, it's going to be difficult to argue for it because you already have an audience that would agree with you. However, if you have a topic that is arguable, in other words, something that needs research in order to support it, then that's going to make a much stronger topic. As we move through the semester, you're going to find that you're going to need counter arguments in order to do the rest of the assignments. Because the goal of college is to challenge one's thinking, not to necessarily reinforce it. And if you reinforce it with real knowledge that's been tested against ideas that are opposing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess just so it makes sense to you, my topic is help for all veterans with mental health issues.
Mhm.
And to me, I did find articles that were saying, oh, well, here's what we're doing. So I guess maybe I could just read those articles to look at help that has been given to veterans and then just say, well, that's not enough. Like, and go from there in order for it to be a counter argument or um, try to find a way. But it is a topic that everybody would, I think, agree with.
Sure, everyone would agree with it, but maybe not everybody would agree with the amount of funding it gets, right? Or maybe not everyone would agree with the method that's used in order to disseminate it, right?
Right.
So there are places in there where there could be disagreements with how to do it, and maybe you can pull out those disagreements when you're writing your paper and still keep your topic. Maybe change the helping part to another advocating word where it's a bit more forceful in a more precise direction.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Glad to help. Are there any other questions? Those two are fantastic. Any other questions? Okay, all right. If you have questions and you didn't think of them right now, but you think of them later, feel free to schedule a meeting with me after watching the webinar or after our time together tonight if you showed up on the call. All right. Let's keep moving. So this page is going to give you, again, some ideas for how you can write these entries. I think it's really good. It's precise. It's something that'll be able to carry you through all your classes. And so I think it's quite valuable to take a look at it. It even gives you a sample for how annotated bibliographies are generally done. We have a couple in our module that I want to spend more time with tonight versus these, but these are good exemplary ideas. All right, so we're going to move on to the next screen. If it lets me, by the way. All right, there we go. It's letting me. All right. So next we have another secondary source, which is critically analyzing information sources. So this is going to talk about how to critically assess a source. All right. And again, it's very, very good information. Also, again, offered and endorsed by our English department. And so it's something that we're using across the board with all classes. So again, you're going to find this information interesting. A lot of this information, believe it or not, is covered in part in your lab, and it's also going to be covered on the next screen that we're going to look at together as we analyze student samples and we think about what's really good about them and what could be improved with those student samples. All right, but this is a great resource to take a look at. We're going to look at all of this, but just in a slightly different way. All right, mainly because we covered it in a different part of the course. All right, but it's absolutely great information. Okay, so as I mentioned a couple of seconds ago, we have specific guidelines for our class, and I want to spend the bulk of our time tonight looking at that. So keep in mind that for our class, we're only using MLA. You're only able to use scholarly peer-reviewed journals. You want to make sure that you are writing and using the language and structure that this class requests, right? So for instance, in this class, you are going to need to offer an introductory statement. You're going to need to give the main ideas of the article for the most part. You're going to want to make sure that you're giving some information about the background or any biases or anything like that that could be a part of the research article that you're analyzing and summarizing, right? So for our class, we're going to have specific things like the author's names, the title, the publication date. These were things that we saw on the previous page from Cornell, right? But this is the Cliff Notes version, believe it or not, of a lot of that. And so for our class, you're going to need to explain the relevance of your work and how it speaks to your topic and all of those things. I know that you have been introduced to this information before, perhaps in a previous class. So you want to make sure that you're recalling these things that you learned from English 1301 or maybe from high school, so that you're able to use this information as you get ready to write your annotated bibliography. All right. For our class, you want to make sure that you don't forget those small things like you want to use transition words. You want to make sure that the transition words are meaningful, that either they show the location of the information in the original source by using to start with or before, and then afterwards and next. It just lets you know, and me also know, the breakdown or the original layout of the original article. You also want to make sure that you're using transition words that speak to addition. If you're just piling on ideas, maybe you found one idea in one part of the article and another idea in another part of the article, but those are the only two ideas you need. So you want to make sure that you're using addition words to let me and you know that this is what you're doing. If you use the layout where you're literally mapping us through the article, it's better for you because you can go right back into the middle of the article if you see that the annotated bibliographic entry summary shows you that you were in the middle of that paragraph when you wrote that. So it's just like a quick way to remind yourself of where everything is. If you use the addition version, then you know that the idea is there, but you may have to search for it a bit. I would recommend only using the addition version if you're only going to acknowledge a couple of ideas or a few ideas in the article and you don't really need the whole article, or at least a lot of the article. All right, so keep that in mind in terms of making decisions about transition words. I'm more of a stickler for this in English 1301 in terms of using the layout version instead of the addition version. However, in English 1302, students generally have a lot more background knowledge, and so they can make better decisions about when they're going to use this type of information. You also want to use transition words to communicate where we are. So for instance, you want to make sure that you are using conclusion statement transitions, right? It lets your audience know the outcome or the results or the conclusion of the research that was done, and it communicates it to them very clearly. That's very important because usually research articles are meant to deliver outcomes, right? So that's going to be important. So you want to make sure that that conclusion statement is there. You want to make sure that as you're going through major details or communicating anything that the author or authors are stating, you want to make sure that you are looking at those communication verbs. Don't just say states, writes, and she states, he writes, or whatever. You can vary it a bit. Maybe you could say that he emphasizes, she remarks. These types of things just make your writing stronger and it keeps it from being so redundant. All right. You want to make sure that you have a full paragraph, one paragraph, and that paragraph has at least 300 words. That's one of the minimum requirements for the assignment. You will get a 0, unfortunately, if you have 299 words or less. All right, so you need to have 300. Why do you need to have 300? Why are you such a stickler? I'm not a stickler. You have to have 300 because that helps us from having to write another essay. We have to have so many words that we've written by the time we get to the end of the English 1302. So I could give you another essay to write, or I can ensure that you're writing strong annotated bibliography so you have one less assignment to do. Applause, applause, applause. All right, so you do want to meet that 300 mark, mainly so that we can continue to prove that we are meeting the guidelines for what the state of Texas, Collin College would have us do in English 1302. Are there any questions so far? No? Okay, good, good. All right, so let's take a look at what you're doing for this assignment. For this assignment, you are writing a bibliographic entry with 10 sources, all right? And it must have the following 3 movements or elements, if you will. Number 1, all of your bibliographic entries must be written in MLA format, all right? So be careful not to use APA because you will get points deducted, and I will ask you to make sure that you have it in MLA. MLA is the Modern Language Association, and that's what we use in English class. Next, you want to have a brief overview of the work, at least 200 words. The brief overview of the work is going to be the summary, as the true summary aspect of it, where you tell me the introductory statement, where you give me the main idea of the article, where you give all the major details, where you give the conclusion statement, how the thing concludes. That's your technical summary. The part at the end of that summary, which is the last part of the annotated bibliography entry summary, is the evaluative and connective aspect. So in other words, you evaluate the source and you talk about how that source is connected to your topic, all right? So I give these arbitrary numbers, like at least 200 words or at least 2 sentences or 100 words. That's just to give you some idea of the portions, if you will. So 2/3 of it should basically be summary, and then 1/3 of it should basically be the evaluative aspect or the connecting aspect. This is not precise. So if you end up doing 250 words in summary and a sentence or 2, or I'm sorry, 2 to 3 sentences for the evaluative aspect of it and the connecting aspect of it, that's okay. This is writing, it's not math. So it's not gonna always be that precise. So give yourself room to write. Can you go over 300 words? Sure, you can go over 300 words. But should you go under 300 words? You cannot go under 300 words. And I should have at least 2 sentences for the evaluative and connecting aspect of your topic or of the article. All right. Are there any questions about what should be included in your bibliographic entries and summaries?
For the first part, when it says a bibliographic entry with all required publication details in appropriate MLA format, is that just like what we turned in last week?
Mhm.
Okay, just making sure you didn't want it in any different.
I know. It was hard enough to get it that way, so we don't want it any different, right? At this point, we just want to copy and paste. Yes, that's all I
Right,
want.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right, so you're just copying and pasting that preliminary bibliographic entry, and then you're adding a summary to it. All right. Are there any additional questions? That's a good one. No? Okay, we're moving. All right. So I give more details about how this assignment works. Keep in mind, this is still a technical assignment. So you want to make sure that you're careful to follow the instructions for this assignment, all right? The structure is there mainly to give you something to go on, but it's also there to ensure that all students are kind of writing at the same level and producing the same amount of work. Keep in mind that you are allowed to use direct quotes in this, right? So direct quotes are limited to no more than 7 words. So you cannot like directly quote, gobs of information and put it in the summary. It should mainly be your voice speaking. And if you need to use direct quotes in order to emphasize a certain point, you are free to, all right? With that being said, I'm going to move on to the next page unless anyone has questions. Anyone have a question? No? Okay. So let's take a look. So I've updated a couple of pages. Actually, I've updated 4 or 5 pages in this module, mainly for clarity. And this is one of them. So the annotated bibliography sample entry has a few things to consider. Number one, you get the topic. Number two, you get the entry. And then next, you get the summary with the evaluative statements. And so in the end, your annotated bibliography entry should look like this. And you'll give me 10 of these. Okay. So each of the elements for the annotated bibliography entry, they're all included in this sample. So we are going to take a look at what those entries should have. All right. So let's just look at the labeling. So here we have our topic. Here, this is the technical bibliographic entry. We also called it the entry from the preliminary bibliography, AKA, but technically this is the bibliographic entry. This is the summary. We call the whole thing the bibliographic entry when we're looking at the annotated bibliography, but for our purposes here, I want to make sure that we are using the correct technical language, all right? So we have an introductory statement here. The introductory statement introduces the author, the title, the publication, and the publication date. It is the first part of the summary, all right? It basically takes the information that's up here and puts it into a clear sentence without adding all the superficial details like the volume, issue number, the permalink. We don't need any of that. It would make the sentence long and confusing and kind of clumsy because there's too much stuff in it. So we want to keep that nice and clean with the author's name, the title of the text written with quotation marks. So we keep that that same punctuation rule. We want to make sure that we're still italicizing the journal, and we want to make sure that we are giving the date. All right. The next thing that your summary should have is a summary thesis. The summary thesis gives the main idea of the article. All right. So this student did a good job of giving a main idea. The problem is that they said that the article begins with, and then they gave the main idea. All right. So usually you want to just give the main idea and then talk about where the article starts. And it's okay if you don't. For this particular summary thesis, it's well done. It just lets us know that the summary thesis is at the beginning of the article, which is completely fine, all right? But just make sure that you're using keywords to indicate to your audience who has not read the article that we are looking at the summary thesis or the main idea, all right? So this one really kind of lets us know that, but you can use words like overall message, primary point, things like that in order to make sure that you're communicating that the summary thesis is there. The next thing that this sample offers us is an example of how someone used a direct quote. Now, this person did not give a parenthetical citation for it. They get a free pass on that because it's essentially their notes and it's in this article. So parenthetical citations are certainly welcomed, but if the parenthetical citation is not there for the direct quote, points will not be taken off on this assignment. On future assignments, you will have to give the parenthetical citation along with the direct quote. We also have attributions where the student attributed the research to the author. So here we have according to Turner, which is the author's last name. So we have that kind of information there. Keep in mind, you do not want to use the author's first name. It is highly inappropriate. You want to use the author's last name in order to keep the formal nature of the assignment. Okay, so do not use the author's first name, use the author's last name. This is something that you were probably taught in high school or English 1301. So we're re-emphasizing that rule now that we're in English 1302. The other thing that we want to pay attention to is that this student used a transition word to let us know that later in the article, which means after this thought, the next thought occurs. And so I think this is a really good thing for us to remember because, again, it helps us and our audience know exactly where we are in this retelling of the article. All right. The next thing is we see that there's a combo here with an attribution and a transition. He also rationalizes. So he is an attribution, also is going to be the transition word. If you notice here, we just have the transition word, later, which indicates location. And here we just have the attribution, according to Turner. But here we have both, all right? Combining these ideas makes for really strong writing. You can repeat attribution and transition. I usually teach my 1301 students to kind of nail down that idea, just so that they get into the process of communicating that the thought is somebody else's and not their own, in order to keep us out of trouble with plagiarism in future essays. However, in English 1302, you have more leeway to determine how exactly you want to communicate it. The main thing is that attribution should be in your summary somewhere and transition words should be in your summary somewhere. All right. Finally, there's a conclusion statement here, and it is he concludes. That lets us know that this is a conclusion statement. We have a conclusion transition here. So with this conclusion transition, your audience is clear and you are clear exactly where you're getting this information from and what the findings for the research entail. All right, so that's a very important part of this summary. And then finally, the evaluation and connection part of it. This connects you back into the topic, right? And this student says this article is relevant because it provides vital information and statistics about measles outbreaks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the student has clearly communicated that the purpose of this sentence is to communicate the connection back to their article, all right? I'm sorry, connection back to their topic, okay? And so the evaluation connection part, you need to demonstrate at least connection with evaluation or connection. The evaluative part, you may not feel qualified to evaluate the source, but the connection part you certainly can do. But if you want to evaluate, and if you can evaluate, try to offer some level of evaluation. Say if the source is strong or if it's not strong for your topic. That's the easiest way to arrive at an evaluation, especially if you're able to identify why. All right. So there's an outline down here of how the paragraphs should essentially be set up. It's just a quick way to kind of check your own work to see if you've added each element. All right. So now I will take questions before we move on. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, we're moving. So on the next screen, we literally look at how we would do this on our own. There's 7 steps for creating annotated bibliography summaries, all right? So you wanna make sure that you're, again, using those pre-reading skills of scanning the source and focusing on paragraphs that include your keywords. The next thing is you wanna make sure that you're able to identify and determine the main ideas of the article. So that includes the summary thesis and all of the other major details that you would like to include. The next thing you want to do is you want to analyze those supporting details to determine how the author is putting something together or why they are choosing the direction that they're choosing. This will help you with your evaluative statement at the end, but it'll also help you to more clearly understand your major details and maybe how you would use that research. And notice this is all reading, so we haven't really gotten to the writing part just yet. After you do that, You want to make sure that you do a deep dive read into your articles, specifically in those areas where there are keywords that were part of your original search. You want to definitely do a deep dive in there. I'm trying to save your reading time when I say that you probably don't need to look at the procedure itself. Whatever procedure that they use or methods that they use for creating their experiment, you don't need those unless you're planning on recreating the experiment. Okay. Instead, you want to focus on the major outcomes of the experiment, not the methods for completing the experiment. Okay. So hopefully that saves you at least 10 pages of reading. Focus on the introduction and focus on the outcome, and focus maybe on the discussion, and those things will probably give you what you need. All right. I give a little plug for you to do labs 1 through 3 if you haven't already, because it makes all of this make so much more sense. All right. And if you have done them, fantastic. You already know what I'm talking about in terms of these reading skills. If you haven't done them, then please do. Next, the 5th step is for you to evaluate your sources. Again, you can build on what you thought about when you analyze the sources. Now you're making judgments about it. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it going to work? Was a experiment premature because not enough things in the world had happened yet before they tried to do the experiment? Did you read another article that refutes the findings of that experiment? So those are the types of things you're looking for whenever you're wanting to evaluate. And then finally, you'll want to make sure that you make a connection back to your topic. So you have to get that connection in there. And this is more for you than it is for me. This is mainly so that you know your why. Why did I choose this, and where was I going with this idea? Because you're going to put this down and you're going to go 9 more articles in and you're going to forget about article 1, trust me. So this method of summary is going to really save you a lot of time when it's time for you to write your research papers. And then finally, after you compile all of this information and think through all of these thoughts and jot down all these notes, then you'll be ready to write your single paragraph summary after you go through these 7 steps. Are there any questions about the 7 steps? No? Okay, we're moving. Okay, so this is where I need you guys to help me out. And so you guys are going to be helping me out for the rest of our time together. So please do. Okay, so we're going to look at this sample entry. All right. This is from a previous semester. So these are raw. I haven't edited them at all. I literally just put them in, and I wanted to look at them with you so that we could think about what makes them strong and what could make them stronger. All right. And maybe a few weaknesses here or there. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to look at the article. All right. Okay, now that we've had a chance to review the article, let's think about just the revision criteria that you have in the discussion question that's going to be coming up for grading pretty soon here. All right, let's take a look. So the first thing you want to take a look at is the entry correct? Does the entry offer everything that it needs to offer? And if you look at this entry, you probably notice that it gets a thumbs up or a thumbs down. What do you think?
Thumbs down. I don't see italics.
There's no italics. Very good. So what would we need to do in order to fix it? I'm going to edit it with you guys so that way you can see kind of how this whole thing works. All right. So we need to italicize. So let's italicize aggressive behavior, right? And why are we italicizing aggressive behavior, somebody?
Journal.
Because it's a journal. What else needs to be italicized? I picked the first one, somebody else picks the second.
EBSCO host.
EBSCO host. Very good. Okay, so now both are italicized, and so now we are at least in a better space with the entry, all right? Because this student would have lost points on the entry itself. All right, let's look at the next area. Is there anything else that needs to be updated with this source in terms of the entry itself? Very good. Very good. Very good. Okay, now obviously we could take out the links to external site, but it doesn't really need to be taken out. But we could take it out just because it looks better whenever it's not there. All right. I'm not gonna.
Period after 2021?
Say it again.
Is there supposed to be a period after 2021?
So let's look at this. This is basically a sentence, right? So everything dealing with the journal itself will go in the same sentence. So we have the title of the journal, the volume, the issue number, the date, and then we have the page number. So all of this is going to go together, and the period will go after the page number.
Okay.
Because this kind of starts the database sentence. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And this is, and the rest of it's pretty obvious. Okay, good. That was a good question. That's a good one. All right. Anything else that maybe we should pay attention to in the entry? No? Okay. Let's look at the article summary. Okay. So the first thing we need to pay attention to is review the organization of the structure, consider the overview of the source, observe how they create the summary. And here we are. Do they offer an introductory statement that includes the title, the author, publication, and the publication date? All right, so let's go back up together. So notice that this is the very first sentence. Let's pay attention to it. Is there anything in this first sentence that needs to be modified? Anything at all? There's one thing I'm gonna let you know.
The journal also needs to be italicized in the sentence.
Very good. So everything is there, right? The title, the author, the publication, it's there, but no one would know it because it's not italicized, all right? When you italicize something, it lets your audience know that this is a long work, all right? So when you have parentheses, like this guy over here, it lets your audience know it's a short work, right? So poems, songs, they're gonna go in quotation marks, like articles go in quotation marks. Whereas over here, it's italicized because it's a journal that offers several different articles. So it's italicized, like a novel or an album would be italicized, all right? So there's just a italics rule there. All right. But other than that, we have the year and we have the date. So that introductory statement is good to go. Let's look at the next thing. Do they offer a summary thesis? Do they communicate the overall point of the article? That summary thesis really should be like the second sentence in the paragraph. Let's take a look. Here's the second sentence. The article starts by informing us that a critical stage in sexual development is the adolescence stage. Do you think that this is going to work for this student's summary thesis? Do you know for sure that this student has communicated that this is the overall message or the overall point of this article?
I think they just jump in and start summarizing rather than having that thesis.
Correct. The summary thesis is missing. And if this is a summary thesis, it's not well communicated. There are no words in there that say focus or overall message or primary point. So this student would need to improve this particular sentence in order to communicate more clearly that it's a summary thesis. Anyone have any idea what the student could do to make that happen? How could we improve this? Is the author going to need to communicate a completely new thought? This one can't be modified in any way? Is that what we're learning?
Yeah, I think it just needs to be a new sentence.
Okay, yeah, it's going to have to be a new sentence, and the new sentence isn't there. So we would have to come up with one, but we didn't read the article, so are we able to do that?
Nope.
No.
Nope, we can't. All right, so we would write ourselves a note. Actually, let's write it this way. Summary thesis is missing. Okay, now let's look at what the student does next. It says the article starts by informing us that a critical stage in sexual development is the adolescent stage. It is believed that adolescence is the stage in which the beliefs and the concept of sex are formed. Okay, anything there?
I think that's just a general statement. It's not really communicating that this is specifically what the author has communicated. They're just kind of pulling it out and saying it without crediting that thought to anybody.
Yeah, so kind of just giving us some background information on this particular idea. I think the student maybe could have communicated it a little bit better too. There's a part in here, it says, it is believed that adolescence is the stage in which the beliefs and concept of sex are formed. Did anybody else kind of have a hard time getting through this part of the sentence? Or did it communicate pretty clearly to you?
I was able to read it, but there's a certain tone. What's the word? Do you know what I mean? There's ways of communicating. There's first person, second person, and then there's also I don't know the word. You know what I mean though, right?
Sure, it's kind of written passively.
Yes, that.
It's in the passive voice. So we would want to modify this in order to improve it. We want to do that so that we can improve it, so that we can make it more powerful, impactful, and meaningful. When you write something in a passive voice, usually you're trying to be nice, you know, or you're trying not to offend. So you kind of keep some distance between it. But whenever you're communicating for something that you're trying to advocate for, you have to use a more active voice. And so in passive voice writing, typically can get a bit confusing. So you want to make sure that you're using the active voice when possible. Also, you know, she probably could switch the stage in which the beliefs to maybe where instead of in which, mainly because in which is something that we kind of default to, but where could be a stronger way to communicate that. All right, let's keep going. Adolescence is also the stage where harmful behaviors can be developed. And this is proved by the fact that the majority of sex offenders had their first aggression during this time. Because of the rising access and viewership of pornography, policymakers and researchers have become concerned about the behavioral outcome of about what the behavioral outcome of adolescence will be. All right. Again, this sentence again, can be modified, just for clarity. But in terms of the ideas that the student is communicating, so far so good, guys?
Yes.
I think so. Let's keep going. It was determined that a percentage of adolescents that viewed violent pornography had a higher chance to be associated with sexual violence themselves. Another important thing to note, oh, there you go. So the student did use a transition word, which is good, is certain psychopathic traits, which can be factors that determine whether or not someone can have sexually aggressive traits in the future. And these traits include sexual misbehavior and deprivation of compassion. Do we understand what was going on in that sentence, everyone?
No, it's like you have to reread it to try to kind of get where they're going and what direction they're trying or what they're trying to advocate for.
Yeah.
So it's a little confusing.
Yeah, agreed. So I love the transition. I love the transition. That's fantastic. However, the sentence itself needs revision. So we would write a note to revise for clarity. Consider breaking the sentence into two sentences for clarity.
I think this this writer has a habit of writing in that passive voice and just makes it hard to read a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, we all have things that we naturally do. For instance, me right there, right? So we all have things that we naturally do. So we have to know our tendencies. Basically, what we're doing right now is what would happen in a writing center meeting. This was what I used to do when I was a writing center tutor. We would just meet with students and we would, workshop their paragraphs, mainly to see their tendencies. And that was actually a really accurate assessment. This student tends to write in the passive voice. And so this is something that the student will be able to work on over time with the tutor. By the end of the semester, if they really work on it, they won't be writing in a passive voice anymore. It just takes a couple of sessions. Okay, callousness has always been found to be in correlation with sexual aggressiveness, and so has peer pressure and conformity. This type of influence ultimately leads to desiring popularity amongst peers, which causes them to do reckless things. The reason why this article was so meaningful for my Right for a Cause topic is that it discusses one of the main issues that result from pornography and the behaviors it causes, and that is sexual aggressiveness. Okay, so we've gotten down to the end of it. What are a couple of things that we know for sure the end of this paragraph is missing? Let's look at our checklist again. Let's take a look. Do they guide you through the article by offering major details or a layout of the article? Would you say yes or no to this student?
No, I think it was written a little harshly, if that makes sense. Not a lot of credit to the original author of the article and just general statements. And then especially the end, though it was written like harsh. There was no smooth transition at the end, very end.
Okay, thank you for your vote. Any other votes? It's a good vote. Yeah, I see in the chat, very general statements. Yeah, the student did give quite a few general statements. You don't really get a sense of what's truly in the article. You kind of get a sense of maybe just a couple of ideas, and the student elaborated on those ideas based upon, kind of their aim for this article. Also, you kind of get the sense that the student just dropped the mic at the end. It was like, I'm done. Why? Because the student doesn't even offer a conclusion statement. How does the article end? What's some of the research? What did the research conclude, rather? We don't really know. So the student, does a decent job of trying to be objective in the beginning, and in the end, they just kind of let the whole thing go and say, this is why I want to use this source. So it's missing some of the nuances, right? So it's missing primarily a conclusion statement to close out the paragraph. And there's not a lot of evaluation offered either. So there's that too. All right. All right. But they do offer a connection. All right. So, so they do the basic things, but they just could do them better. How many of us found workshopping this one paragraph helpful? Okay, awesome. All right. Well, you know what? We've reached the end of our time. And so there are two more that we could do, but I'm going to leave them for you to do for extra credit. If you'd like to make adjustments to the other two sample paragraphs to see if you can earn a little bit extra credit. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you so much for staying for the webinar. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all next time. Good job. Thanks for coming tonight, everybody.
Thank you.